Cool, man. Well, so this podcast is about you and your journey in music and how you got to where you are now. And we'll talk about walking papers and that whole journey as well, if that's cool.
Yeah, love it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, awesome. So tell me, whereabouts were you born and raised?
Tacoma, Washington, the armpit of America.
Tacoma, Washington. So how is that?
I mean, it was sometimes rural and sometimes, it was a little urban, little rural, but we still didn't have sidewalks, still had gravel, and there's still some horse pastures and that kind of stuff. But you also, had some kids that journeyed a little further into the city and came back with good records and stuff like that,
That's cool. That's cool. How did you get into music?
I mean, I think I was one of those people that music was just, my mom always had some on the radio, but I mean, even before I was going to school, I was already like dabbling with writing songs and like, making up my own lyrics to songs that were on the radio and that kind of thing. I mean, I just was really drawn to it, so it rang a bell to me. It just seemed like natural. No musicians. And I mean, there's musicians apparently earlier in my family, but nobody I knew. Mm-hmm. And then my mom actually one time dated an Elvis impersonator because she was a single mom with two rotten boy kids, right? He actually played guitar and he gave us a 45 of Heartbreak Hotel, which I think is just one of the best blues songs ever. Storytelling, and then it gives you the fundamentals of the 1, the 4, and the 5 are all in there, and it just kind of it's a good setup for that.
Sure. And then with that, like, what was the first instrument you learned to play? Was it piano?
I wanted to get a guitar because I was kind of obsessed with the Police when I was like in 3rd grade.
Okay.
But I didn't know the difference between a bass and a guitar. So I think, my heroes were Sting and Stuart Copeland. But later on, I kind of learned to appreciate what Andy Summers brought to it. And then, so I have my dad, we would go, sit with him every, 2 weeks in Christmas or over the summer for 2 weeks. And then, so he'd always try to blow up Christmas to make up for some lost time. So I did get a guitar. Okay. I didn't have anybody to teach me how to play it. So the first few years were a lot of like, cleaning it and keeping it cool. But I didn't have lessons or anything until a guy that lived across the street had a little band. He was a bit older than us, and so they conned me into like if I helped them load equipment in and out of that rec hall at the Army base.
Oh, okay.
So like you could rent it, like check out amps, like a library of amps and drums and stuff.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, I think they still have them. I think a lot of Army bases have like rehearsal rooms for the music. I think they're pretty supportive of their music players in the Army, in the military.
Really? I haven't heard that before. That's amazing.
Yeah, they have I have a friend that even like does music in the Army for like parades and stuff. So they have like rehearsal, like ISO booths and stuff like that. But back then they just had a rec hall. Those guys used to trick me if I loaded all their stuff in, and they'd show me a couple chords, so they taught me the pentatonic scale and they taught me a power chord, and then I hit the ground running.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. And then from there, did you end up joining a band or forming a band? Like, what was the first experience you had playing with people?
I had a friend who he got a bass out of a Korean made bass, because also like on the military guys, you could get all these deals from like Korea through the PX and stuff. So he had a bass and I had a guitar, and we kind of fumbled around with whatever we could learn in like Guitar Player magazine or whatever. It's funny, like I think the first solo I learned was a Carlos Santana solo, but I'd never heard the song. I only had
interesting.
So I had my version of it. And so when I finally heard the song on the radio one day, I was like, what is that? I know that song. And I just knew it from learning the tablature, because you would just learn anything you could because that's all you had, right?
Sure. That's amazing.
Yeah, so we played together, and then we got a little band together. We, at some point I went and saw, someone drugged me along to see what became Alice in Chains at the Renton Musicians Hall.
Wow.
Yeah, and so I saw them at like 14, and then I went home and I started trying to write my own songs because that's what they were doing, and they were pretty cool. And then within 6 months or a year or something, we had played our own show, and then that's how we kind of figured this is how you do it. You rent a little hall. Before that, I guess they kind of showed us the roadmap to how you would do it, because I kind of figured you just kept practicing, and then at 18 or something you moved to Los Angeles. I figured that's what you did, and then I just kind of, once I saw the Seattle thing exploding, although I was a little young I played some shows with those bands and at those clubs, but I wasn't musically developed. I'd found my own voice or anything yet, and I was also an awkward kid with a nose too big for my face, and hair is growing out of weird parts of my body. I wasn't ready to, wasn't cool enough yet,
Sure. But did you end up staying in Seattle, or did you move to LA?
Well, when I was in Tacoma, we would take the bus up here, and we would entertain older girls into driving us, and then we were hanging up in Seattle all the time. So then by the time I was 17, I moved up here, but because we were here all the time anyways, and I had a little bit, we were playing shows and making money and stuff like that, to where we could kind of pay our rent.
When did postpartum depression start? Was that around that same time?
That was a bit later. I was actually kind of frustrated with music and stuff, and I kind of threw in the towel, and so because I was, it was like this thing, and around that time was when all the people that it was like, if you didn't have 2 records under your belt by 26, you kind of figured you didn't have a chance.
Yeah, you're done.
Yeah. Sure. And so I kind of, the minute that I stopped, and before that, I think all the bands that I did were kind of derivative of other things. I was like trying to chase the thing that I thought was going to get me a record deal or something. And then so when we formed Postpartum, it was really like, this is, we're never going to make it anyway, so let's just do what we want. And well, my wife actually brought me home I always loved blues stuff. I think it was because I just had that pentatonic scale, right? So I kind of just always felt the blues. And then my wife brought me home Tom Waits' Big Time videotape,
Okay.
And I had never, I knew who Tom Waits was, but I didn't really know his whole deal. And I loved the Stones and Howlin' Wolf and all that, and just like some old blues stuff. And then when she played that, I was like, this guy's like, he's like Keith Richards, Frank Sinatra, Howlin' Wolf, all in one dude. And I looked at him and I was like, in that video, he's already in his 40s. And I'm like, maybe it's like, just follow who you are and you get a different ride. It's not like this shot to stardom, but it's like this slow crawl of just writing cool shit and carving out your own thing that may never have some huge impact, but it'll have you'll have a way to do what you love. And that was really inspiring to me. And so at the time, I kind of loved that, and I loved the Cramps, and I loved, I also loved, like Love and Rockets, and, and then all the bands that I grew up with. And we were like, let's just fuck around and play what we want. And we did.
Sure.
Instantly, we started getting like offers and made some demos, and things started happening. So it was really one of those things, which I think, being an American songwriter, that, people need to find, if you're not singing something that's really true from you and you're following someone else's thing, then it becomes like a product, not a passion. I think that people respond to that passion more than they do to something that's like a manufactured thing,
Sure. No, I totally agree with that. With that, like you started doing your own thing, and that's when things started to happen for you. I did see that you got signed to a record deal, and which eventually, led to signing you a major label. Like those must have been pretty big moments for you.
Yeah, it's funny, because I was just at someone's thing last night, a birthday party, and the drummer from Postpartum Depression was there, and we were talking about that, and we were talking about how, when you first get a record deal, it's limousines and hot tubs on the. And then, like, after you get a record deal, it's flea bags and potato chips. Once they wined and dined you, then they're like, oh, we got them now. So,
right.
Relationship that starts out with a lingerie and it ends up in a, sweatpants and a college t-shirt.
Sure. So did you have that experience? I mean, at that time, were labels putting money out and trying to kind of, like you said, wine and dine you?
Well, we were talking about that time, and I had my first daughter about that time, and so I would have signed anything like at that time.
Sure.
Any check that I can get that will buy diapers and baby food, I will take, And but then when we got in the deal, it's like, there's a lot of learning experience. They sent me around writing songs with different producers and this and that, and I think that they saw something there, but I think they knew it needed to develop. But of course, at the time, we were really eager to get, we wanted to get something out and get moving.
Sure.
In hindsight, I think they were right. But like we were on the label, and by the time we kind of got our thing together, refined what we were doing, the people that signed us were gone. The label, the president who signed us moved to a different label, and all these. I mean, not the owners, not Jimmy and Ted, but like it was Tom Wally or whatever was the guy that was actually, I don't know if that means anything to you, but he was the guy that was really interested in us and signed us, and he moved to like Warner Brothers, and now I think he does his own label.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
yeah, you hear those stories where people leave and then it kind of your band gets lost in the shuffle of it all because the pioneers for you are now at other places. I've heard that story before.
Yeah, and they didn't understand what we were doing because we were, the new guy was the guy that did like Linkin Park and Stain. I mean, not Linkin Park. I've seen that poster back there, but Stain and Limp Bizkit.
Okay.
So they were way more into that rap rock thing, and they were invested in that. And then I think that they saw like, a bunch of kids with shaggy hair and tight jeans and Converse. They didn't understand what we were doing, but I actually think we were kind of ahead of the curve. And then that was like right around the early 2000s. And then that stuff started to happen with the Strokes and all that. And we were trapped at a label for a few years there, right when that stuff was hitting, and they wouldn't let us make a record. So finally we got out of the deal. We actually did pretty good because they were in breach of contract. They owed us a record. And so then they a little chunk of money. So we bought our own studio and we started making records on our own. And then we made them in our practice room with Jack and Dino and started moving. And it was, by then we actually were developed, and I still think those records are good today.
Wow. Yeah. And with that, were you able to do some big tours or after you kind of left the label, or was that like, what was the downfall of that happening as far as like, I mean, were they able to offer you something that, then they went away and then you kind of had to build yourself up, but it sounds like you were able to put better records together.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time in obscurity out there, but we actually did get some good tours. Or actually some people that we knew hooked us up. We did a tour with through the Queens of the Stone Age guys gave us some tours. And I think that they had another band that we were friends with was Louder Milk, which the drummer went on to be in AWOL Nation and some other bands.
Wow.
They were we had all these bands that were fans of what we were doing. Right.
Sure.
So they had played some of our stuff with the Queens guys. And so they had got us, gave us a tour, and we did another tour with one of our manager guys hooked us up with Dee Dee Ramone.
Oh, wow. That's rad.
I didn't get my Grammy, but I had Dee Dee Ramone, call me in my hotel room and said, "Will you boys keep it down over there because I'm trying to get some sleep and we got a long drive tomorrow." And he also said, "Hey," he was like, "Jeff, your songs are just fine. Don't let no producers put chords in there because they're gonna, they're gonna try to steal your royalties."
That's cool.
And also,
that's really cool.
Josh it's so funny. And Josh from Queens of Stone Age was really supportive of what we were doing. At first, I don't really know him, but he liked our band and he told us.
That's cool.
So we were like, right on. So we just kept plugging at it. And then that's how I met, I just made those records, and then we were a little too drunk and a little too high there for a few years. So then I put together another band, and then, these people like Duff and Barrett and stuff that I started Walking Papers with, they were all just like fans of our band. And so they just asked me to fuck around with them when they had some studio time, and it turned into the first record. I thought we were and then they were like, "Hey, let's go play shows and do a thing." And then they opened a lot of doors for me, which I'll always be grateful for that.
And that's when Walking Papers started?
Yeah.
It was around that time? Okay. Wow.
Yeah, so that was like the first decade, 2000 was post-stardom in the missionary position. And we made like 4 records and 2 records each for that. And then Walking Papers thing kicked in early, like 2011, 2012. And then right around 2012, we had a record out in 2013.
Wow. And you said that was kind of formed just from, jamming with Duff and these guys, and that ended up becoming...
Barrett was in the Screaming Trees and so in Mad Season, and we played a show with him, and he was a fan, and he called me and asked me if I wanted to jam, and he's great, and I said why not, and we did. And then after like a couple jams, he was like, "Hey man, I got some studio time, you want to just go record these jams?" And we did. the first record. But so I had a few of those songs hanging around, you know. So when we were jamming, he's like, "What do you got?" And I would just play him some of these songs I was working on, and then you know, we just recorded that record, you know, after like 6 rehearsals.
Wow.
Yeah, but I mean, I had songs pretty developed.
Uh-huh.
Right? But then he's like a natural producer. You know, he's just, oh, let's get moving. I like that. Keep pushing. You know, and he wanted things to be super fast. I don't think he realized I did so much work before we got started. You know.
Sure.
And then Duff, we just asked Duff as a friend to come play on it, and he did. And then he was like, "Man, I think this stuff's really cool. How about we, you know, do some tours and that kind of thing to support the record?"
Wow. And what were those first tours like? Was it different playing with those guys than it was in the 2 previous bands?
I mean, yeah, because because of them, we got to go to Europe, you know. And
cool.
I've been over there hanging out, but I never been over there touring before. So, and then because of them too, a lot of more people are paying attention to your record and giving it reviews and opening doors, and different labels were doing some things. And so, you know, we did some big festival tours too, like in the States. And then, you know, through some of these different bands, we got to do a lot of in front of a lot of people and saw a lot of countries and kind of built up our own little thing.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And then a few years later, you guys, or a handful of years later, you put out the second Walking Papers record, WP2. And what would you say like the milestone moment of that record was? And was that different from putting the first album out because you already had the songs kind of done prior?
Well, that's more a true Walking Papers record. The first record is closer to like what a record I'd make on my own with Barrett producing. The second record is more of like what we were as a band, because, you know, we were out there touring. We toured with Aerosmith and Pyro and Alice in Chains, and like we really became a band. And when you have a rhythm section like Duff and Barrett, if you're as a songwriter, you start going, let's write songs based on the rhythm section, you know. And so that record truly is that band. But we made that record right away, but everything kind of got put on hold with the Guns N' Roses reunion. And then we kind of we kind of saw the writing on the wall that it was never going to be the same. And I think Barrett liked the idea of being in a super group, and to me, I was just like, I just want to write songs and make records. And if more people know about Walking Papers, then let's do that. But I did make a Static Land record in there in between, like while I was killing time, thinking maybe we're going to make another, you know, the Walking Papers record would actually come out. It didn't really work out that way. So then I came back, and, you know, eventually they kind of gave me their blessing and was like, you know, we can't continue to do it, but, you know, they're kind of your songs and your thing, so you should continue to do that because more people are aware of it than my. Yeah. Wow.
And then with that, I mean, the record came out, what, 2018, the Walking Papers 2?
Yeah, but we had made it in like 2015.
Okay.
So, or maybe even 14. So we made that in 2014. Then that record didn't come out. I went and did the Static Land record. And then, so that record we actually made after that Walking Papers record. And then the Walking Papers record came out.
Okay. And
you know, what's funny is you find that, like, you find that there's all sorts of stuff that, like, people, like, if you're a really music nerd, you'll find, you know, like Physical Graffiti by Led Zeppelin, half those songs are B-sides from other records.
Oh, right. Or like, you know, Abbey Road and like for the Beatles and stuff, like that record was done last, and they put out Let It Be as the last record.
Same thing. Yeah, that was, you know, a lot of times, you know, my musical things are, a lot of people compare it to the Beatles. You know, I mean, a lot of the thing, all my career moves are parallel right down the same as the Beatles. You know,
so that was what you're aiming for.
Yeah. And then also, like, you know, like even like the Stones, they did Start Me Up. They did that like 2 or 3 records earlier, and they even told the guy just to like just delete that one. You know,
really, I didn't know that.
And then some guy was like, "Hell no," he kept it, and then he played it back to him like a few years later, and they were like, "Sure," and it became like a, you know,
yeah, they're like the song they come out to every single time they play.
Yeah, they're like, that's that song we threw away. You know?
Right. Wow. So 2018, it comes out. Were you touring it? Like, tell me how, you know, where you kind of were within that next year or two before like COVID hit.
Yeah. Well, I toured it. I put together a new band, and we toured the States twice, and we toured Europe twice too. So we went out with we did headlining tours of our own, and then we did headline tour of the States, but then we did some dates with Alice in Chains, who are friends of ours from up here. Then we did tour Europe with Stone Temple Pilots, and we did the States, Miles Kennedy, and then we did Europe on our own over there too. You know,
that's awesome. That's so cool.
So we were actually, I mean, so we did, you know, good. I'd say, I don't know, 120 dates for it, supporting. You know, and it was cool. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
And were you working on this new record at the time of, like, where were you guys at late 2019, 2020?
Yeah, I was starting to write songs for this record when all this kind of stuff kicked in. You know, we were probably going to do another tour or two for that second Walking Papers record, but then this kind of killed any chance of that happening.
Sure.
You know? But we had already kind of kicked in on the demos and stuff for this record. And then, so we just kind of knuckled down and finished it.
So you were able to finish it, like, what, in the early, like, did you have to put anything on pause in the beginning?
Well, we kind of, we had like the basic tracks down, you know, so it was like really all the overdubs and that kind of stuff, and then mixing it. So you know, what's funny is a lot of people will be like, did you write this during COVID? So like when the Walking Papers record came out, they're like, did you write this during the Trump presidency or whatever, you know?
Sure.
I was actually, you know, you make a record, you start the songs, it takes a year, you know, unless you can go into the studio for a month straight, you know, it takes you a year to finish the songs, record them, master them, you know, print up the artwork, print them, you know, so it's like everything's a little bit delayed, you know.
Sure.
So the record was, you know, done, you know, the songs were written prior to COVID, you know.
Okay. And did you just hold on? I mean, you obviously, the record came out last month, right? In February, beginning of February. So did you have to just hold on to it and like hopes that, you know, everything was going to kind of open up so you could tour it? Like, what was that experience?
Well, I didn't, but the label was kind of like everyone's so nervous about what are you going to do. And of course, a lot of records that we sell are actually on tour. So they just, you know, I think the guy was like, this is going to be the longest lead up in history. So it was like, they're really releasing the first single, maybe 6 months ago, you know, or like 5 months ago. And then, you know, a month and a half goes and they put out another one. And so 3 singles before the record even come out. It's like, seems to be how the world's starting to operate now. Cause it's like, as you're building up to a record, people are interested. Once you get the record, everything is so quick. Now, then people hear it, they love it. Hopefully it finds a place in their world and sticks with them. But, you know, people, you know, sometimes people ain't even talking about what's going on now. They're talking about what's next, you know, when they're
right
present in the moment. And it's a band, you're like a Twitter date. You know what I mean? They're just swiping by you as the world's going. And, you know, they say like people have a fear of commitment with relationships like society does these days, because they're like always like, what's next? You know, who's
right.
And it's like, it's kind of like that with records in a way now. And I mean, I find myself doing it too. A new record comes out, I get obsessed with it for, you know, a couple of days, but there's so much stuff and you have access to it all. It's not like when I grew up, you had 4 records. You had 4 records and you listened to those records whether you liked them or not.
Right. Yeah. You just
every song but the single sucked. It doesn't matter. Those songs was what you had, and you with those records.
You'll listen to them enough times to where they don't suck anymore to you.
Yeah, you're like, oh my God, that's so hooky.
After the 600th time I heard this, I really am starting to understand it now.
Yeah, well, and it is kind of true, you know. I mean, I think that that's a shame with some music, because some of the best stuff is a little bit difficult. You know, I mean, imagine if you put on Dark Side of the Moon and you were a 14-year-old kid that was like used to Old Town Road.
Road, sure. We're like
2 minutes in and the singing hasn't even started.
Yeah, you put on Time and you're like, yeah, is this the same song? Like, what's going on here?
Right, and it's like that's some of what the beauty is like that, you know, tension and release. But it's like, I don't know if there's any time people are taking the time for the tension to feel the release anymore. You know, so I think some people are. I don't pretend to know what all society does, but I do think that some songs are kind of patient and they need a little time to build up. And I like that feeling. I like going for a ride. I don't necessarily want to, you know, I like it. That's kind of like suspense is the thing, you know, like if
right.
telling a story, you know, you got to create some suspense to have a climax, you know?
Sure. I'm still a fan of, you know, putting a record on, listening to it all the way through. And, you know, there's obviously a reason why an artist chose this is the first song and this is the last song and everywhere in between, how it kind of flows. It's not like you're like, just, this is the first song I wrote and then the second and the third, and that's how we're going to lay it out. But there's a, you know, kind of a process to selecting the track listings and where they are. And nowadays it's like a single and then that's it. I've talked to artists where they say, well, why would I put a whole record out when, you know, I could put a single out and then let it kind of do its thing and then put another single out and do its thing? Because once you put the whole album out, then are people going to listen through the whole thing?
Well, you did say when you talk to an artist, right?
Yeah, certain artists.
If you're a freaking artist, you know, you're not just creating the art hopefully just because of the reaction of what people are going to think or do. If sure. At that point, are you even leading? You know, like you should be following. It should be like there's some guy, I think it was, I don't know who wrote it. It might've been, but they were saying like, if you're a writer, what do they say? It's like you're writing, like they're talking about books, right? Uh-huh. And if you feel like you want to write a novel to impress your friends, please don't. You know, if you make $1 million, please don't. If you write a novel and you feel like you need to let your wife check it out first before you release it to the world, please don't. But then they're like, if you cannot, you're going to become mentally unstable if you do not write this thing. If this thing is burning inside of you and you can't function in the day until you get it out of you, then they're like, proceed. You know?
Yeah.
About music. If it's done for any other reason than this fact that it's like burning inside of you and you got to do it, just stop. You know?
Yeah. I love that.
I think it's true. I think it rings true. It's like you can get a Pro Tools rig or you can buy a Casio keyboard that has a song, has 100 little songs built into it, and then you could talk over the top of it. But why? You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Some people need, you know, make room for the people that need this for their mental stability, you know? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, and I think that when an album kind of does that, because some songs are, you know, how they sit next to the other one, you know, that contrast or whatever, or they complement each other in a different way, you know?
No, yeah, totally. It's like, I came from radio and programming. It's like there's a certain reason why you put this song next to this song and you don't put these two songs together because it's not going to make sense sonically for people. But I'm sure it's the same way when you're building your record, why, like I said, like why you chose the first song to be the first song and the last song to be the last song.
Yeah. Well, that's in radio too. A lot of good DJs, I think, could make some pretty good producers, especially as far as like sequencing an album. Mm-hmm. They understand that. Like when you listen to a song, like this song doesn't sound fast if it's played after that song.
Right.
Urgent if it doesn't. And the same thing is true in the song itself. You know, how the chorus sits against the verse and how what the bridge does for the song. It's all part of that thing. And it's like music is like a linear art form. It's not like a painting that you just, well, even a good painting should probably take your eyes somewhere and captivate interest longer than a quick glimpse.
Sure.
But, you know, it does need you know, it needs time to make it happen. It needs to have some kind of negative space in it or something to complement what it is. I think the album's still a viable thing.
Yeah, I do too. And I completely agree with you. With this new record, you know, living that world of album tour, is this, I mean, how are you navigating this record and that situation that we're kind of under right now?
We're just making we made a lot of videos, made 3 videos. One of them was 12.5 minutes long, for goodness sakes. And then we have a 4th one coming out. And then, I don't know, we might continue to do some more of that, but we actually are starting to write songs on a new thing now. So me and Ben, who's kind of my accomplice in all this, we're just down night before last, and actually we're bringing in all our ideas and kind of going, you know, what kind of thing are we doing here? We're kind of choosing our direction. What, you know, that was interesting too, because I actually gave him some songs. I was like, listen to these, and he was like, you know, he's like, that's a couple of them. He's like, that's a great song. He's like, it's a great song written in a parameter on a road that a lot of people have already traveled. He's like, I don't think, he's like, even if that song is really as good as all those songs, what's the point? So he kind of put the challenge on to like, you know, like trying to think about like, what can we do to write songs that is like a road we've never traveled before, or try to create a sound that's like, that's not safe. You know, we want to break out the machete and carve a forest out to, you don't want to necessarily walk down the freeway someone else has already passed.
Sure.
And I think now is a good time to do that because we've already established that we can kind of write songs. So we're really into like taking some chances and doing that kind of thing right now.
Wow. So is this going to be something that's going to be towards a Walking Papers record, or just something totally new?
No, it'll be a Walking Papers record, but we're just looking at it a little bit differently about how we're going to approach it, which is kind of fun. And, you know, because what are you going to do right now except for be creative, because you can't tour. And the first people to do tour, it's going to be pretty sketchy to see what happens. You know what I mean? Are they going to have their ass handed to them? Or are they going to, you know, or are they going to be the saviors of people's lives? I don't know yet, you know, but it's already hard to get in a van and travel and stuff like that. It's not, you know, it's like a labor of love most of the times, you know.
Sure. Yeah. And just taking my family across country to move was, you know, a thing in itself. You know what I mean? Like, I can't imagine going to every, you know, 100 cities in the country over the course of X amount of months. I mean, we traveled for 6 days, and I'm like, all right, this is getting kind of, you know, worrisome, where you're staying in multiple hotels and this, that, and the other thing.
How many people you got in your posse?
4. My wife, we have 2 kids and 5, including our dog. So that made it even a little bit more challenging. So,
yeah.
But we did it, we made it, and everybody was healthy and safe. But, you know, we were only gone 6 days, and I can't imagine being in a van with 4 other people, traveling the whole country, running into hundreds of people every night. I mean, yeah, I don't know where we're at with that yet.
Yeah. Well, you get better at it. And I used to take my dog on tour with me.
Oh, really? That's awesome.
He was, the problem is black clothes and white fur. So if you're going to be in a band, you got to get a black dog. So there's a couple of kind of cranky that every day they had little white fur on their black clothes.
Sure.
But I was like, it's my van and my fucking overtaking the dog.
And my dog. That's cool.
But he used to actually sit we had him trained. I had a guitar case and he would sit in the guitar case on stage.
Really?
But then as he got older, he started to get a little braver and finding the kitchens in some of these places, and they'd be like, "You and that dog, get him." So then we decided to start leaving him at home. He did make it hard to travel. Snuck him into a few hotels in a backpack and stuff where they.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. I know that was a thing too, trying to find hotels that let you have animals, and yeah, my wife did a lot of research on that end when it came to booking our journey cross country.
Yeah. So she's your tour manager?
She is. And she's the tour manager. She's pretty much my manager. She's the you know, the admin of our whole podcast. So
awesome. That's cool.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Jeff, so much for talking with me today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Yeah. I have one more question for you. I want to know if you have any advice for aspiring artists.
Someone's told me, I can just pass on the good advice that someone told me without time to think about it, but it was, as an artist, one needs to speak in truth, because although it may not guarantee success it will guarantee longevity, because truth is what the universe resonates on.
I love that. That's amazing.
I think if an artist is trying to they need to be looking for their own truth and then share that truth with other people. But, you know, sharing someone else's truth, that ain't going to resonate in the universe, you know?